Marcus Thompson had served the British royal family for 15 years. At 42 years old, he was one of the most trusted guards at Kensington Palace. His tall frame stood perfectly straight in his crisp uniform, and his sharp blue eyes never missed a detail. Other guards looked up to him, and the royal family knew they could count on him completely. Marcus had grown up in a small town in Yorkshire. His father was a police officer, and his grandfather had served in the military. From a young age, Marcus knew he wanted to protect people. After finishing school, he joined the army and spent 10 years serving his country. When he left the military, becoming a royal guard felt like the perfect next step. The job was not easy. Marcus worked long hours and had to stay alert at all times. He protected different members of the royal family, but his favorite assignments involved the younger royals. Prince George, now 10 years old, had been under Marcus's protection many times over the years. The boy was bright, curious, and always polite to the staff. Marcus remembered the first time he met Prince George. The prince was just 5 years old then, with messy blonde hair and bright eyes full of questions. While other children might be scared of the serious-looking guards, George had walked right up to Marcus and asked if his uniform was heavy. Marcus had smiled and told the little prince that it was worth carrying because it meant he could keep special people safe. Over the years, Marcus watched Prince George grow up. He saw the boy learn to read, start school, and develop his own personality. George was not like other royal children Marcus had protected before. He was genuinely kind to everyone he met, from the kitchen staff to the gardeners. He remembered people's names and always said thank you. The palace was a busy place. Every day brought new visitors, events, and activities. Marcus had to coordinate with other guards, check security arrangements, and make sure everything ran smoothly. He took pride in his work and had never made a serious mistake. His supervisors praised him regularly, and he had received several commendations for his excellent service. Marcus lived alone in a small apartment near the palace. He had never married, choosing instead to focus entirely on his career. His job was his life, and he was happy with that choice. He had close relationships with his fellow guards, and they often spent their free time together. But Marcus was always the most dedicated among them, often volunteering for extra shifts and never complaining about difficult assignments. The other guards respected Marcus not just for his skills, but for his character. He was honest, reliable, and treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. When new guards joined the team, Marcus was usually the one chosen to train them. He taught them not just about security procedures, but about the importance of discretion and professionalism. Prince George seemed to sense that Marcus was different from other adults around him. While many people acted nervous or overly formal around the young prince, Marcus treated him with natural respect. He spoke to George like he was a real person with real thoughts and feelings, not just a title. This made their interactions comfortable and genuine. During public events, Marcus stayed close but invisible. He watched George interact with crowds, other children, and officials. The prince handled these situations with remarkable grace for someone so young. Marcus felt proud watching George represent his family so well. Even though he could never express these feelings openly, professional distance was crucial in his job. The palace had strict rules about relationships between staff and the royal family. Guards were expected to be friendly but formal. They could not accept gifts, share personal information, or develop friendships beyond their professional duties. Marcus had always followed these rules perfectly. He understood that maintaining proper boundaries was essential for everyone's safety and comfort. But over the months leading up to the incident that would change everything, Marcus began to notice something special about Prince George. The boy seemed to understand people in a way that was unusual for his age. He paid attention to small details about the people around him. He noticed when someone looked tired or sad, and he always tried to say something kind. Marcus had seen many wealthy and powerful people during his career. Most of them were polite enough, but few showed genuine interest in the people who worked for them. Prince George was different. He asked Marcus about his day, remembered details from previous conversations, and seemed to actually care about the answers he received. The guard began to look forward to assignments involving Prince George. Not because the work was easier, but because the young prince's genuine nature made the long hours more pleasant. Marcus found himself smiling more during these assignments, something his colleagues began to notice. One autumn morning, Marcus arrived at the palace for what seemed like another routine day. He was assigned to accompany Prince George to a local school visit. The prince would be reading to younger children and participating in some educational activities. These events were usually straightforward from a security perspective, but they required careful attention to detail. As Marcus prepared for the day, he had no idea that something would happen during this ordinary school visit that would shake him to his core. He had no way of knowing that Prince George would do something so unexpected and meaningful that it would force Marcus to question everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and what it truly meant to serve others. The morning started like any other, but by evening, Marcus would find himself in the most difficult position of his entire career. A single moment of genuine human connection would create a conflict between his professional obligations and his personal values that seemed impossible to resolve. Marcus checked his equipment one final time and straightened his uniform. He had protected Prince George dozens of times before without incident. He was confident, prepared, and ready for another successful day of service. Nothing in his 15 years of experience had prepared him for what was about to happen next. The black sedan pulled up to Millfield Primary School at exactly 9:30 in the morning. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat, constantly scanning the area for any signs of trouble. The school had been chosen carefully for this visit. It had good security, cooperative staff, and a reputation for treating royal visits with appropriate respect and discretion. Prince George sat quietly in the back seat, reviewing his notes for the reading session. He wore a simple navy sweater and gray trousers, dressed to blend in with the other children as much as possible. His private secretary sat beside him, going over the schedule one more time. The visit would last 2 hours, including the reading session, a tour of the school, and lunch with selected students. As they stepped out of the car, Marcus immediately positioned himself where he could see both the prince and the surrounding area. A small crowd of parents and local residents had gathered behind barriers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the young royal. George smiled and waved politely, but Marcus could see the slight tension in the boy's shoulders. Public appearances still made him nervous sometimes. The headmistress, Mrs. Patterson, greeted them at the school entrance. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had been running the school for over 20 years. She had met several minor royals before, but never someone so close to the throne. Despite her nervousness, she managed the introduction smoothly and led them inside. The first stop was a classroom of 6-year-olds who were waiting excitedly to hear Prince George read. They sat cross-legged on a colorful carpet, their faces bright with curiosity. Some whispered to each other, trying to contain their excitement. Their teacher, Miss Williams, looked almost as nervous as the children, constantly adjusting her dress and checking that everything was perfect. Prince George settled into a child-sized chair and opened the book he had chosen. It was a story about a young dragon who was afraid to fly. As he began reading, his voice was clear and engaging. He used different voices for different characters, making the children giggle and lean forward with interest. Marcus watched from the corner, noting how naturally the prince connected with his young audience. During the reading, Marcus noticed something that made him smile despite his professional composure. Prince George kept looking at one particular child in the back row. The little boy appeared to be around 7 years old, with messy brown hair and clothes that were clean but obviously well worn. Unlike the other children who were hanging on every word, this boy seemed distant and sad. When the story ended, the children applauded enthusiastically. Prince George asked if anyone had questions about the book. Several hands shot up and he answered each question thoughtfully. But Marcus noticed that the prince's eyes kept returning to the quiet boy in the back. Something about the child had clearly caught George's attention. After the reading session, they moved on to tour the school. Mrs. Patterson showed them the library, the computer room, and the art studio. Prince George asked intelligent questions and showed genuine interest in the school's programs. He complimented the children's artwork displayed in the hallways and stopped to chat with several teachers. During lunch in the school cafeteria, Prince George sat at a table with 8 selected students. The conversation was lively, with children asking about palace life and sharing stories about their own families. Marcus stood nearby, but his attention was drawn to the same boy from the reading session. The child sat at a different table, eating alone while other students chattered around him. The boy's lunch consisted of a simple sandwich and an apple. He ate slowly, often staring out the window instead of focusing on his food. Marcus wondered why such a young child looked so troubled. In his years of security work, he had developed a keen ability to read people's emotions, and this child was clearly struggling with something significant. Prince George seemed to notice the boy too. Even while engaging with the children at his table, the prince glanced over several times. Marcus could see the wheels turning in George's mind. The young royal was clearly thinking about something, and Marcus had learned to recognize that particular expression on the prince's face. After lunch, they were scheduled for one final activity before departing. The children were going to show Prince George their special projects in the school garden. As they walked outside, Marcus noticed that the lonely boy from lunch was helping to tend some vegetables in a corner of the garden. He worked quietly by himself while other children gathered around the prince. The garden was impressive for a school project. The children had grown tomatoes, carrots, beans, and herbs. They had also created a small flower garden with bright blooms that attracted butterflies and bees. Prince George listened attentively as the children explained how they had planned and planted everything themselves. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that some of the vegetables would be used in the school's lunch program, while others would be sent home with children whose families needed extra food. She said this casually, not wanting to embarrass anyone. But Marcus caught the meaningful look she gave toward the boy working alone in the corner. Prince George asked thoughtful questions about organic gardening and sustainability. He complimented the children on their hard work and asked if he could help with some of the weeding. The kids were thrilled to have him join in, and soon the future king was on his hands and knees, pulling weeds alongside 7-year-olds. As the garden activity continued, Marcus kept one eye on the security situation and another on Prince George. The boy seemed completely in his element, laughing with the children and genuinely enjoying the simple activity. But Marcus could see that George's attention kept drifting to the solitary child still working in the corner. Finally, Prince George stood up and brushed the dirt from his knees. He thanked the children for showing him their garden and complimented their teacher on such an excellent project. But instead of heading back toward the school building, he walked over to where the quiet boy was working alone. Marcus felt his professional instincts heighten. This was not part of the scheduled activities, and any deviation from the plan made him nervous. He moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but he could see that Prince George was simply trying to talk to the child. The boy looked up, surprised to see the prince approaching. George knelt down beside him and started asking about the vegetables he was tending. The child answered quietly, showing George the tomato plants he had been carefully weeding. For the first time all day, Marcus saw the boy's face light up with genuine interest. They talked for several minutes about gardening and plants. The boy seemed to know quite a lot about growing vegetables, and Prince George listened with real attention. Marcus could see that something special was happening in this conversation, but he could not hear the specific words being exchanged. Then Prince George did something that made Marcus's chest tighten, with an emotion he could not immediately identify. The prince looked around to make sure no adults were watching closely, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Marcus could not see what it was from his position, but he could see the boy's face transform with surprise and what looked like gratitude. The interaction lasted only a few more moments before Prince George stood up and rejoined the main group. The boy returned to his gardening, but now there was something different about his posture. He looked less alone, less burdened. Marcus filed the moment away in his mind, knowing that something significant had just occurred even though he could not fully understand what it meant. The drive back to Kensington Palace was unusually quiet. Prince George sat in the back seat, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression. Marcus glanced at him several times through the rearview mirror, wondering what was going through the young prince's mind. The boy seemed different somehow, more subdued than usual after public appearances. Marcus had been thinking about the interaction in the school garden. He replayed the scene in his mind, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The way Prince George had approached the lonely boy, the secretive manner in which he had given him something, and the transformation in both children afterward. It had been unlike anything Marcus had seen in his years of royal protection. Back at the palace, Prince George thanked Marcus politely for his protection during the visit, as he always did. But this time he lingered for a moment longer than usual. The prince looked as though he wanted to say something more, but then seemed to think better of it and headed toward his private apartments. Marcus completed his post-assignment paperwork and debriefed with his supervisor about the school visit. He reported that everything had gone smoothly, with no security incidents or concerns. But he could not stop thinking about that moment in the garden. Something about it felt important, though he could not explain why. That evening, Marcus returned to his small apartment and tried to relax. He made himself a simple dinner and settled down to watch the news. But his mind kept wandering back to the school visit. He found himself wondering about the boy Prince George had spoken with. What had made him seem so sad and alone, and what had the prince given him? The next morning brought disturbing news. Marcus arrived at work to find his supervisor waiting for him with a serious expression. There had been a complaint about the previous day's school visit. Someone had reported that Prince George had given something to one of the children, which was against protocol. Royal family members were not supposed to give gifts or money to individuals during public appearances without prior approval. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had suspected that something unofficial had happened in the garden, but he had hoped it would go unnoticed. Now it seemed that someone had seen the interaction and reported it through official channels. His supervisor wanted a detailed account of everything Marcus had observed. Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His job required him to report everything he saw, especially anything that deviated from approved protocols. But something inside him resisted the idea of getting Prince George into trouble for what seemed like a genuinely kind gesture. He provided a factual account of the visit, but found himself downplaying the garden incident. His supervisor was not satisfied with the vague report. Word had come from higher up that this incident needed to be investigated thoroughly. The royal family took protocol violations very seriously, especially when they involved young Prince George. Any inappropriate behavior needed to be addressed immediately to prevent it from becoming a pattern. Marcus was ordered to write a detailed report about exactly what he had witnessed during the garden incident. He was told to include every detail he could remember, including what Prince George had given to the child and why he had not intervened to stop it. The report would be reviewed by security officials and possibly shared with Prince George's parents. That afternoon, Marcus sat at his desk staring at a blank piece of paper. He had written hundreds of reports during his career, but none had felt as difficult as this one. Every word he wrote could potentially get Prince George into serious trouble. The boy might face punishment, additional restrictions on his public appearances, or closer supervision during future events. But Marcus also knew that failing to write an accurate report would be a betrayal of his professional duties. He had sworn an oath to serve the royal family with honesty and integrity. Protecting Prince George sometimes meant protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. Even when those actions came from a good place, Marcus began to write, but found himself struggling with every sentence. He described the school visit in detail, the children's activities, and the general atmosphere. But when he reached the garden incident, his pen seemed to freeze. How could he describe what he had seen without making it sound worse than it was? He thought about the lonely boy who had been working alone in the corner. Marcus had seen enough troubled children in his life to recognize one who was struggling. The child's worn clothes, his isolated behavior during lunch, and his sad expression all painted a picture of someone who needed kindness. Prince George had clearly seen the same things and felt moved to help. But the rules were clear. Royal family members could not give personal gifts to members of the public without approval. It opened up possibilities for misunderstandings, accusations of favoritism, or worse. The protocols existed for good reasons, and Prince George should have known better than to break them. Marcus put down his pen and rubbed his temples. He had been a soldier and a security professional for most of his adult life. He understood the importance of following orders and maintaining discipline, but he also understood human compassion and the desire to help someone in need. He thought about Prince George's character. In all the years Marcus had known him, the boy had shown nothing but kindness and genuine concern for others. He was not reckless or disrespectful of rules. If he had broken protocol in the garden, it must have been because he felt it was the right thing to do in that moment. Marcus tried to imagine himself in Prince George's position, seeing a child who was clearly struggling, having the means to help and being prevented by rules and protocol from showing basic human kindness. It must have been frustrating for a 10-year-old boy who had been raised to care about others. The more Marcus thought about it, the more conflicted he became. His professional duty was clear, but his personal feelings were equally strong. He respected Prince George and believed in his good intentions. Writing a report that could get the boy in serious trouble felt like a betrayal of the trust they had built over the years. But Marcus also thought about his own position. If he wrote a report that minimized or omitted important details, and if the truth came out later, he could face serious consequences. He might lose his job, damage his reputation, or even face legal action for filing a false report. His career and livelihood were at stake. As evening approached, Marcus was no closer to finishing his report. He had written and rewritten the same paragraphs multiple times, never satisfied with how they sounded. Every version seemed to either make Prince George look bad or make Marcus look like he was covering something up. He decided to take a walk around the palace grounds to clear his head. The evening air was cool and crisp, and the familiar surroundings usually helped him think more clearly. As he walked past the windows of the royal apartments, he saw Prince George sitting at a desk, apparently doing homework or reading. The sight of the young prince working quietly at his studies made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. Here was a boy who would someday be king, already showing more genuine compassion at age 10 than many adults managed in their entire lives. Should such kindness really be punished just because it did not follow proper procedures? Marcus knew that his decision about what to write in the report would affect more than just his own career. It would influence how Prince George was treated going forward, what restrictions might be placed on him, and possibly how he viewed his role and responsibilities. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous. As he walked back toward his apartment, Marcus realized that he was facing the most difficult decision of his professional life. Everything he had built over 15 years of service was at stake, but so was his ability to live with himself afterward. He would have to choose between his duty to the institution and his loyalty to the person he was supposed to protect. Marcus spent a sleepless night wrestling with his conscience. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Prince George's face as he knelt beside the lonely child in the school garden. The genuine concern in the young prince's expression haunted him. By morning, Marcus had made a decision that would change everything. He arrived at work early and immediately requested a private meeting with his supervisor. Commander Williams was a stern man in his 60s who had served the royal family for over 30 years. He had little patience for sentimentality when it came to security protocols, but he respected Marcus's judgment and dedication. In the privacy of Williams' office, Marcus made a confession that shocked his supervisor. He revealed that he had deliberately omitted key details from his preliminary report about the school visit.
He had seen Prince George give something to the child,
and he had chosen not to intervene or report it immediately because he believed the prince was acting out of genuine kindness. Commander Williams's face grew increasingly serious as Marcus spoke. Protocol violations were one thing, but a security officer failing to report them was far more serious. Williams reminded Marcus that his primary duty was to the institution, not to any individual member of the royal family. Personal feelings could not be allowed to compromise professional judgment. Marcus understood the gravity of his position, but he pressed on with his explanation. He described the lonely child's circumstances, the obvious signs of need, and Prince George's compassionate response. He argued that punishing a 10-year-old boy for showing kindness would send the wrong message about the values the royal family should represent. Williams listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each word. When Marcus finished speaking, the commander sat in silence for several long minutes. Finally, he spoke in a voice heavy with disappointment and concern. He told Marcus that this was not just about one incident, but about the entire system of security and protocol that protected the royal family. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Marcus's career. Williams explained that if word of this incident reached higher authorities, it could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Prince George might face severe restrictions on his public appearances. Marcus would certainly face disciplinary action and possibly dismissal. Even Williams himself could be held responsible for inadequate supervision. But Williams also acknowledged something that surprised Marcus. In his 30 years of service, he had seen many members of the royal family grow up. He had watched some become entitled and disconnected from ordinary people, while others maintained genuine compassion for those less fortunate. Prince George, even at his young age, clearly fell into the latter category. Williams made a decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of immediately escalating the matter, he decided to investigate the incident more thoroughly himself. He wanted to understand exactly what had happened and why before deciding how to proceed. He ordered Marcus to accompany him on an unofficial visit to the school. The next day, Marcus found himself back at Millfield Primary School, this time in civilian clothes and driving an unmarked car. Williams had arranged to meet with Mrs. Patterson privately, ostensibly to discuss security arrangements for future royal visits. But his real purpose was to learn more about the boy Prince George had approached. Mrs. Patterson was surprised by the unexpected visit, but she welcomed them warmly. Williams explained that they were conducting a routine follow-up on the recent royal visit and wanted to ensure that everything had gone smoothly. He asked general questions about the children's reactions and whether there had been any issues or concerns. Gradually, Williams steered the conversation toward the boy in the garden. Without revealing the real reason for their interest, he asked about children who might have special needs or circumstances that required extra attention. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew more serious as she began to discuss some of her students' challenging situations. The boy's name was Tommy Chen, and his story was heartbreaking. His father had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving his mother to raise 3 young children alone. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, but the family still struggled financially. Tommy often came to school without proper lunch money, and his clothes were hand-me-downs from older siblings or charity donations. Mrs. Patterson explained that Tommy was a bright and capable student, but he had become increasingly withdrawn since his father's death. He had trouble making friends and often seemed sad or distracted during class. The school did what it could to help, providing free lunches and connecting the family with local support services, but Tommy still bore the weight of his family's struggles. During Prince George's visit, Mrs. Patterson had noticed the interaction between the 2 boys. She had seen Prince George approach Tommy in the garden and speak with him quietly. Afterward, Tommy had seemed different, more hopeful somehow. Mrs. Patterson had wondered what they had talked about, but she had not wanted to pry. Williams asked careful questions about what Mrs. Patterson might have observed during that conversation. Had she seen Prince George give anything to Tommy? The headmistress hesitated, then admitted that she had seen what looked like a brief exchange, but she had been too far away to see details. She had assumed it was just friendly conversation between children. Before leaving the school, Williams asked if they could speak with Tommy directly. Mrs. Patterson looked puzzled by the request but agreed to call the boy from his classroom. When Tommy appeared in the office doorway, Marcus felt his heart sink. The child looked even smaller and more fragile than he remembered. Williams introduced himself and Marcus as friends who worked with people who visited schools. He told Tommy that they had heard about Prince George's visit and wanted to make sure everyone had enjoyed it. Tommy nodded politely but seemed nervous about being called to the office. Gently, Williams asked Tommy about his conversation with Prince George in the garden. The boy's face lit up as he described how the prince had been interested in his tomato plants and had asked thoughtful questions about gardening. Tommy clearly treasured the memory of those few minutes of attention from someone so important. Then Williams asked the crucial question. Had Prince George given him anything during their conversation? Tommy's expression changed, becoming more guarded and uncertain. He looked back and forth between the 2 men, clearly wondering if he was in trouble for something. Marcus watched the boy struggle with his answer and felt his heart breaking. This child had clearly been taught to be honest, but he was also protective of what had obviously been a special moment with Prince George. Finally, Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was Prince George's personal compass, a beautiful antique piece that had been a gift from his grandfather. The compass was engraved with the royal crest and was clearly valuable, both monetarily and sentimentally. Tommy held it carefully as though it were made of the most precious materials in the world. Tommy explained that Prince George had noticed him looking sad and had asked if he was okay. When Tommy had mentioned that he sometimes felt lost without his father to guide him, Prince George had quietly pressed the compass into his hand. The prince had told him that it would always point him toward home, and that he should think of his father watching over him whenever he felt confused or alone. Williams and Marcus exchanged glances, both deeply moved by the boy's story. The gift was far more significant than either of them had imagined. It was not just a breach of protocol, but a deeply personal gesture that revealed the true depth of Prince George's character. Tommy asked anxiously if he was in trouble for accepting the gift. He said he would give it back if necessary, but Marcus could see how much the compass meant to him. The boy held it like a lifeline, clearly drawing comfort from both its practical purpose and the kindness behind the gesture. Williams assured Tommy that he was not in trouble, and that they were simply trying to understand what had happened. He told the boy that Prince George's kindness was something to be treasured, and that the compass was a special gift that he should keep safe. As they drove back to the palace, Williams was unusually quiet. Marcus could see that his supervisor was struggling with the same conflicting emotions that had tormented him. The incident was clearly a serious breach of protocol, but it was also one of the most genuinely compassionate acts either of them had witnessed in years of royal service. Finally, Williams spoke. He told Marcus that they were facing a situation that could not be resolved by following standard procedures. The rules were clear, but applying them strictly would punish kindness and potentially damage a child who had already suffered enough loss in his young life. They needed to find a different way forward, one that honored both their professional duties and their human values. Commander Williams made an unprecedented decision. Instead of filing an official report about the protocol violation, he requested a private audience with Prince William and Catherine. This was highly unusual, as security matters were typically handled through formal channels. But Williams believed the situation required a more personal approach. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in Prince William's private study at Kensington Palace. Marcus was ordered to attend, despite his protests that he had already caused enough trouble. Williams insisted that Marcus's first-hand observations were crucial, and that his honest account of the incident was exactly what the prince's parents needed to hear. Marcus had never been in such an intimate meeting with senior members of the royal family. He stood at attention while Williams explained the situation, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as the story unfolded. Prince William's expression grew more serious with each detail, while Catherine listened with a mixture of concern and what might have been pride. When Williams finished his account, Prince William asked Marcus to describe exactly what he had witnessed. Marcus chose his words carefully, explaining how Prince George had noticed Tommy's isolation and apparent sadness. He described the genuine care the young prince had shown and the thoughtful way he had approached the troubled child. Catherine asked about Tommy's circumstances, and Marcus found himself providing details about the boy's family situation and the challenges he faced. As he spoke, he could see both parents processing the information with the kind of deep concern that only fellow parents could truly understand. Prince William was quiet for several long minutes after Marcus finished speaking. Finally, he asked to see his son privately before making any decisions about how to handle the situation. Williams and Marcus were dismissed with instructions to wait for further orders. An hour later, they were called back to the study, this time with Prince George present. The 10-year-old stood beside his father's chair, looking nervous but determined. Prince William explained that he had discussed the incident with his son and wanted to understand George's perspective on what had happened. Prince George looked directly at Marcus as he spoke, his young voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. He explained that he had noticed Tommy seemed sad and alone during the school visit. When he had approached the boy in the garden, Tommy had mentioned missing his father and feeling lost without his guidance. The young prince continued, describing how he had remembered his own grandfather's compass and how it had always made him feel connected to family when he was away from home. He had thought that giving it to Tommy might help the boy feel less alone and more confident about finding his way forward. George acknowledged that he knew giving personal gifts during public appearances was against the rules, but he said that seeing Tommy's pain had made him feel that helping was more important than following protocol. He had not wanted to ask permission because he was afraid adults would say no, and he could not bear the thought of leaving Tommy without trying to help. Prince William asked his son if he understood why the rules existed and why his security team had been concerned. George nodded seriously and explained that he knew the rules were meant to keep everyone safe and prevent misunderstandings. He said he was sorry for putting Marcus in a difficult position and for causing problems. But then Prince George said something that made everyone in the room pause. He looked at his parents and asked if being kind to people who were hurting was not also a rule that royal family members should follow. He said he had always been taught that helping others was one of the most important things he could do with his position. Catherine reached over and squeezed her son's hand, clearly moved by his words. Prince William studied his son's face for a moment, then turned to Williams and Marcus. He said that while he understood the security concerns, he was also proud of his son's compassion and his willingness to put someone else's needs before his own comfort. The discussion that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his career. Instead of focusing solely on rules and protocols, they talked about the values the royal family wanted to represent and how to balance security with genuine human connection. Prince George was included in the conversation, his opinions treated with respect despite his young age. Prince William made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of punishing Prince George for the protocol violation, he wanted to find a way to support both his son's compassionate instincts and Tommy's ongoing needs. He asked Williams to arrange for the palace to quietly provide ongoing assistance to Tommy's family through established charitable channels, but Prince William also established new guidelines for future situations. He explained to George that while his instincts to help had been admirable, he needed to find ways to channel that compassion through appropriate means. They would work together to develop protocols that allowed for genuine human connection while maintaining necessary security. Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief and unease as the meeting concluded. Prince George would not be punished, and Tommy would receive help that could make a real difference in his life. But Marcus was acutely aware that his own actions had created this entire situation by failing to follow proper procedures. As they prepared to leave, Prince William asked Marcus to stay behind for a private conversation. Once they were alone, the prince thanked Marcus for his honesty in reporting the full situation, even when it put his own position at risk. He said he understood the difficult position Marcus had been placed in and appreciated his genuine concern for George's well-being. But Prince William also made it clear that such incidents could not be allowed to happen again. He understood Marcus's motivations, but emphasized that security protocols existed for crucial reasons. The safety of his family depended on security personnel following procedures without exception, regardless of their personal feelings. Prince William offered Marcus a choice. He could remain in his position with the understanding that any future protocol violations would result in immediate dismissal. Or he could accept a transfer to a different role within the royal household, one that would remove him from direct protection duties but allow him to continue serving the family in another capacity. Marcus requested time to consider his options, and Prince William granted him a week to make his decision. As Marcus walked back to his apartment that evening, he felt emotionally drained but oddly relieved. The truth was finally out in the open, and surprisingly, the consequences were far less severe than he had feared. But the week that followed proved to be one of the most difficult of Marcus's life. He found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and service. His fellow guards treated him with a mixture of sympathy and wariness, unsure how to react to someone who had bent the rules so dramatically. Marcus spent long hours walking through London, trying to clear his head and figure out what he truly wanted. He had always defined himself by his role as a protector, but the recent events had shown him that protection sometimes meant more than just physical safety. Sometimes it meant protecting someone's capacity for compassion and human connection. He thought constantly about Prince George and the difficult position the young boy would face throughout his life. As a future king, George would be surrounded by people who prioritized protocol over humanity, who saw rules as more important than individual suffering. The compass incident had shown that the prince had a natural inclination toward kindness. But would that survive years of being told that such impulses were inappropriate or dangerous? Marcus also thought about Tommy Chen and children like him who struggled with loss and hardship. The royal family's charitable work helped many people, but it was often distant and impersonal. Prince George's direct human response to Tommy's pain had been more meaningful than any formal donation or official visit could ever be. On the fourth day of his leave, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Prince George appeared at his apartment building with his private tutor, asking if they could speak privately. The tutor waited in the car while George came upstairs, clearly nervous but determined to have this conversation. The young prince thanked Marcus for not reporting the compass incident immediately and for eventually telling the truth in a way that led to help for Tommy rather than punishment. He said he understood that Marcus had risked his career to protect him, and he wanted to make sure Marcus knew how much that meant to him. But Prince George also told Marcus something that made the guard's decision much clearer. He said that the incident had taught him important lessons about finding better ways to help people, while still respecting the rules that kept everyone safe. He was working with his parents to establish a small fund that would help children in situations like Tommy's, and he wanted Marcus to know that the compass incident had led to something positive and lasting. Most importantly, Prince George asked Marcus not to leave royal service because of what had happened. He said that having people like Marcus around him, people who understood that kindness mattered as much as protocol, would help him grow into the kind of king he wanted to become. He needed advisors and protectors who could help him balance his duties with his humanity. As Marcus listened to this 10-year-old, 6 months after the compass incident, Marcus stood in the same position he had occupied for years, watching over Prince George during another school visit. But everything had changed, even though everything looked the same. The protocols were stricter now, the planning more detailed, and the oversight more careful. Yet somehow the visits felt more meaningful than they ever had before. The new guidelines they had developed allowed Prince George to engage more naturally with the children he met, while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. There were designated moments for informal interaction, carefully planned opportunities for genuine conversation, and clear procedures for handling requests for help or support. The security team had learned to facilitate connection rather than simply prevent it. Prince George had matured considerably in those 6 months. He still showed the same compassion and interest in others, but now he channeled those impulses through established procedures. When he met children who seemed troubled or in need, he knew how to connect them with appropriate resources through the palace's charitable networks. The Tommy Chen Fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a way to help one struggling family had evolved into a comprehensive program supporting children who had lost parents. Prince George took an active role in reviewing applications and approving assistance, learning valuable lessons about both generosity and responsibility. Tommy himself had become something of a symbol for the program. His grades had improved dramatically once his family's basic needs were met, and he had developed into a confident, articulate young man. He still carried Prince George's compass with him every day, but now it represented not just one moment of kindness, but an ongoing relationship that had enriched both boys' lives. Marcus had also changed. His relationship with Prince George was deeper now, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what had happened between them. The prince trusted Marcus with confidences about his struggles with royal expectations, while Marcus provided guidance about balancing duty with humanity. They had become something more than protector and protected, though they were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. The other guards had initially been skeptical of Marcus's continued presence, wondering if his previous rule-bending meant he could not be trusted. But over time, they had come to see that his enhanced understanding of Prince George's character made him even more effective at his job. He could anticipate the prince's reactions and needs in ways that purely protocol-focused guards could not. Commander Williams had used the compass incident as a case study in developing new training programs for royal protection officers. The curriculum now included modules on balancing security with authentic human interaction, recognizing when flexibility might be more protective than rigid adherence to rules, and understanding the psychological needs of the royal family members they served. The incident had also sparked broader discussions within the royal household about the challenges facing young royals in maintaining their humanity while fulfilling their duties. Catherine and Prince William had become advocates for allowing their children more opportunities for genuine connection with ordinary people, within carefully managed parameters. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. He had discovered that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to question orders, to think independently, and to prioritize long-term well-being over short-term compliance. This realization had made him a better guard, not a worse one. On this particular day, As Marcus watched Prince George read to another group of young children, he noticed the prince scanning the room for anyone who might need extra attention. It had become George's habit to look for the quiet ones, the sad ones, the children who seemed to carry burdens too heavy for their small shoulders. Today, Prince George's attention settled on a little girl sitting in the back corner. She was probably 8 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that were clean but obviously inexpensive. While the other children giggled and participated enthusiastically, she sat quietly, her expression serious and distant. Marcus watched as Prince George made mental note of the girl's location. During the planned interaction period that followed the reading, the prince made his way over to her with practiced casualness. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the conversation, while maintaining appropriate distance. The girl looked up in surprise when Prince George sat down beside her. He asked her name and complimented the drawing she had been working on during quiet time. Slowly, her reserve began to melt as the prince showed genuine interest in her artwork and asked thoughtful questions about her favorite subjects in school. As their conversation continued, Marcus could see the girl beginning to relax and smile. Prince George had developed remarkable skills at drawing out shy children and making them feel valued and heard. But Marcus also noticed when the conversation took a more serious turn, the girl's expression becoming sad again, as she apparently shared something personal. After a few more minutes, Prince George stood up and thanked the girl for showing him her drawing. But instead of moving on immediately, he quietly spoke to the teacher and pointed toward the girl. Marcus could see the teacher nodding and making notes, clearly understanding that this child had been identified as needing additional support. Later, as they prepared to leave the school, Prince George approached Marcus privately. He explained that the girl, Sarah, had told him about her mother's recent illness and her father's struggle to manage work and home responsibilities. The family was facing financial difficulties due to medical bills, and Sarah was worried about her mother and trying to be brave for her younger siblings. Prince George asked Marcus to include Sarah's information in their post-visit report so that the appropriate charitable organizations could be contacted. He had learned that immediate direct gifts were problematic, but that coordinating longer-term support through established channels could make a real difference without creating complications. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he listened to Prince George's mature handling of the situation. The boy had recognized a child in need, connected with her authentically, and channeled his desire to help through appropriate means. He had shown both compassion and wisdom, exactly the combination that would serve him well as a future king. As they drove back to the palace, Marcus reflected on how far they had all come since that day in the school garden. The compass incident had created a crisis that could have destroyed careers and damaged relationships. Instead, it had become a catalyst for growth, understanding, and positive change. Prince George had learned to balance his natural compassion with his royal responsibilities. Marcus had discovered that true loyalty sometimes required difficult choices and uncomfortable conversations. The entire royal protection system had evolved to better serve both security needs and human values. That evening, Marcus completed his post-visit report with the same attention to detail he had always used. But now his reports included not just security assessments but also notes about children who might benefit from the various charitable programs the palace supported. His role had expanded beyond protection to include identification of opportunities for meaningful service. As Marcus finished his paperwork and prepared to go home, he realized that he had never been more satisfied with his career choice. The compass incident had shaken him deeply, but it had also revealed possibilities he had never imagined. He was no longer just guarding Prince George's physical safety. He was helping protect the boy's capacity for empathy and genuine connection with the world around him. The antique compass still lived in Tommy Chen's pocket, pointing him toward home and reminding him that kindness could come from unexpected sources. But it had also pointed Marcus toward a deeper understanding of what service truly meant. Sometimes the most important protection was not preventing harm, but preserving the humanity that made life worth protecting in the first place. Marcus had resigned himself to leaving royal service after the compass incident, believing he had failed in his fundamental duty. Instead, he had discovered a more meaningful way to serve than he had ever thought possible. The incident that had shaken him to his core had ultimately strengthened his commitment to the royal family and deepened his understanding of what loyalty really meant. As he walked home through the London streets, Marcus carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that tomorrow would bring another opportunity to serve, to protect, and to facilitate the kind of human connection that made the monarchy relevant and meaningful to ordinary people. The compass incident had ended his old career and begun a new one, built on wisdom earned through difficult choices and uncomfortable truths. He had learned that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty was the courage to question authority when human compassion was at stake. That lesson would guide him for the rest of his service to Prince George and the royal family, ensuring that protocol never again stood in the way of genuine kindness and authentic human connection.